Welcome back to Cultivating Resilience. Did you know that neuroscience can help us create better workplaces and support employee resilience? Understanding how the brain processes stress, connection, and productivity can transform how we approach work and leadership. Jenny, thank you so much for being here today. Tell us a little bit about stress in the workplace.
We all think about stress in the workplace as like it's just one of the factors. It just goes along with the territory. It happens to everybody. We get used to the ebbs and flows of stress, so to speak. But sometimes we really forget to think about the concept of maybe two different types of stressors in the workplace, that we can have a positive stress, which I always think about this as like the getting ready for a presentation. I always say like it makes me bring my A game, right? It's just enough stress for some reason that like I am on point, like I have this laser focus. You really are paying attention to all those details and you just nail it. And then there's this other type of stress. We're also whole beings. So when I walk into the door, as much as I'd like to turn off like regular world, my personal life, who I am, what's going on at home, what's going on after work, it doesn't always happen that way. So this other type of stress is more of like a chronic stress, or almost even like, if you want to say toxic stress, but it's just really like this overwhelmed, high level stress, or even a prolonged stress. And that's really the type of stress that can impact the way that we show up in the workplace and really our true productivity and our efficiency, our effectiveness in the workplace, for so many reasons. One of the things that is really important when we think about how does stress impact us, it all comes back to the brain. So our brain, when we think about the part of our brain that we use to do our job, right? That's our good old prefrontal cortex. It's our adulting brain. It's our decision maker, our problem solver, our prioritizer, our analyzer, communicator. All of those things are living there. But when we're under stress, our bodies and our brains are filled with cortisol. It causes other chain reactions within our brain. Our amygdala lights up, which is kind of that like warning or that alert center in our brain. And everything that we take in then is kind of perceived as threatening or potentially threatening. And so we're kind of in this constant like crisis cycle. Even if on the outside, like it just looks like I'm going about my daily business, if I'm really stressed and overwhelmed on the inside, my brain and body are running at a much higher level, right? So I'm expending a lot more resources just to show up and get the day-to-day done. If you think about that over time, like it wears on a person. Yeah. So we talk a lot about burnout, which oftentimes is like organizational pieces. But the internal experience of stress can really lead to a whole different type of exhaustion and depletion for a person. So you see more absenteeism. You can't, it's harder to get to decisions, or you're constantly stuck in like a reactive decision-making place. And we just don't show up in relationships as well. So as a leader, if you're under a lot of stress, oftentimes you're not showing up as the true authentic leader that you are when you're working with your team members, when you're working with other leaders and collaborating. It really just shuts down that adult part of the brain, right? The part that we depend on to succeed.
Yeah. So tell me then, Jenny, when I hear all the things you're talking about, how do I then as a workplace maybe create opportunities for emotional regulation? If I know that some employees are going to be constantly under stress, I want to probably create opportunities where we're releasing some of that cortisol. How do I do that?
I always try to say like the more that we can front load our plan, the better we are. And so I think it's really great even for teams or leaders to have conversations with your team or within your team about what does stress look like? Right? How do I experience stress? Because how I experience it and what it looks like on the outside is going to be different than it will be for you. And what's my stress tolerance? Although we're not always really great at assessing our own stress tolerance, because we kind of get used to it, right? And I just feel like this is my norm. And so some of the things that we can do is just identifying some of those signs and indicators first. But also, how do we set up routines maybe around emotional regulation during key times? So at the beginning of a meeting, How do we kind of just take a moment to maybe breathe and touch base? If it's a larger team meeting, do we do kind of like a headspace listen or just a guided meditation even? It sounds kind of cliche, and some people are like, oh my gosh, my team would never be into that. But surprisingly, once you begin doing that, it really can help. The other pieces are, doing some things for ground. I mentioned grounding, right? So do you have an outdoor place, right? That maybe you can encourage folks to go take some time out there, maybe make it a fun kind of competition, if you will, to say whoever utilizes the relaxation room or the grounding spaces, um, 80% of the time this month or 8 out of 10 days in the next 2 weeks, gets a fun little reward, or you go on the leader list, things like that. But really finding ways to offer and encourage brain breaks can be helpful. Our brains cannot actually sustain that level of focus for 8 hours and be successful with it, and then show up and have enough repair between the end of the workday and the next day to really do it again. And so encouraging people to actually take breaks. And that's where at the beginning of meetings or at the end of meeting, if you can work that break in to allow people that time to just like check out from my focused brain and be in a more free space, connect with other people, share some exciting news or a moment of gratitude even can be helpful, and turn on the more positive wiring networks within our brain. The other pieces too is like making sure you have some opportunities for water throughout the day, making sure you have some healthy snacks, right? So if we have a potluck, it's all cookies and sugar and the things that really get us going that way? Or do we have fruits and vegetables and proteins and things like that? Making a culture of like talking about it. Right? So if I'm a leader, do I check in with those on my team and say, how are you? But like, really, how are you? As opposed to just this professional, nicety, so to speak. But I really am valued in you. I'm assessing your level of stress, but also looking at what pieces of this role are most stressful, what tasks are most stressful. I think we assume people become really great professionals because they can manage all the things. But there are a lot of people who put in a lot of extra time to get there. And the further they go in that career journey, a lot of times the harder it is on their brain to keep managing that level of stress. And so finding other opportunities for skill development along the way can really help with overall regulation too.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much. You shared such great tips. And I think what I'm really taking away is that as leaders, we need to be brain-friendly leaders. We need to keep the brain in mind. There are things that we can proactively cultivate. And even just asking the question, like, how's your brain? Could be a starting place to really be curious about what our employees need. A workplace that understands the brain is a workplace that fosters resilience, creativity, and connection. Let's use neuroscience to create environments where employees can truly thrive.